It's real. It's real, you know?
Yes. Good morning, Joe. How are you doing? We're live. We're here. We're going to talk about something important.
Yes, excellent. Another
Yes.
day that we are on this earth, and we thankful for all of that.
Yes. Yes. We're thankful for that. We sure are. Today, I'm back with Joe Haytas, author of 36 Strategies of Suitability. This week, we're on Strategy 7. We made it. We made it. And in spite of all of our various challenges that life throws with us, I wanted to, one of the quotes, Joe really likes his quotes for the book. I'm just jumping right in.
Go for it.
And this one was from Sun Tzu. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. And I would think, Joe, that you were analogizing that to the enemy being character defects.
That's correct. Actually, the enemy being yourself, you know? Because that's one of my favorite quotes from Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War. And you have to, you have to know yourself. And, well, yeah, and your enemy is knowing. That's right. You got to know yourself. The enemy is yourself in this context.
And the enemy and yourself can be also to the contrary. What are you capable of? What are your strengths? How can you conquer the enemy, meaning the character defects, as Joe's using it in this context, and yourself? So,
Yes. Hmm.
um, character defects. What is your definition of character defects from the book as you explain it to your readers?
Well, I'm referring to obviously a hearing in the context of a hearing, and it's what was going on inside of you at the time of the commitment offense, and especially that, but also at that time in your life, what were the things that you were dealing with, the things that came out of your past, and what you were living at the time. Those things, what was fueling, what uh, compelled you to do whatever it was that you did, that was that brought you to prison.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. And
And
a really techie definition of character defects are mental, moral, psychological traits that reveal personal flaws, weaknesses, inadequacies, failings. I hate to use the word failing because we're all just on one big learning journey, but the defects, they make up the our personality. That
mm-hmm.
makes up our personality, that hinder our ability to function effectively, build healthy relationships, achieve personal growth. And so that really is such an important chapter. I asked you last week, why did you separate it? And I think that's why, because it's really the essence of overcoming your antisocial personality disorder, which is a character defect, meaning it has a kind of a bundle of character defects.
I love your definition that you gave. That's wow, that was spot on.
Well, I had some help. And
Okay.
so in that definition, it described, three types: mental defects, moral defects, and psychological defects. And like a mental defect are these negative thought patterns that we have, cognitive distortions. A lot of times our clients learn about what we hear, distorted thinking, right, Joe? And chronic,
Mhm.
so pessimism, anxiety, paranoia. I had one guy last week, he was a procrastinator and it hurt him at his
Ooh.
hearing. He got a low risk, but he procrastinated his way to a denial. And he did take ownership of the procrastination, but it cost him. And he didn't really have any really good coping strategies for overcoming that. We discussed a waiver. He, again, stubborn is a big character defect we see in a lot of our clients. They just want their hearing instead of thinking. You want to figure out what gets me home the soonest, not what gets me to back to the parole board hearing the soonest. And then they talk about moral defects. These are things like defects such as dishonesty, selfishness, greed. And then we've got our psychological defects, which is low self-esteem, anger, inability to manage stress. So those are really interesting. And there are literally maybe 100, several dozen character defects that we could identify. Maybe we don't all have 100 character defects, but in those 100
Mhm.
character defects, Joe's going to have, 20 of those 100, and I'm going to have 35 of those 100 or 40. And so our clients really need to be able to figure out what those character defects are. And another thing that I think about character defects, as we touched upon it last week, Joe, was think about your motivation for committing that crime. Just think
Mhm.
about the true motivation before you ever went to self-help groups. It's like, oh, because I wanted money. I didn't have a job. My wife was giving birth, or, I was desperate. I was a drug addict. Well, in those real reasons,
Mhm.
real motivations for committing the crime, you can then point to character defects. So I mentioned greed, selfishness, laziness, impulsivity, criminality. And those are just the basics. Those are just a basic example of, I don't want to call it a basic crime because that
Mhm.
marginalizes victims of those crimes, but those types of crimes. And then it gets more complicated the more complicated the crime gets. And so there's that. I wanted to, how do you think someone goes about recognizing their own character defects, their weaknesses?
Well, there's more than one way to do it, but uh, generally it involves going back into your past and exploring your past all the way from as early as you can remember. Uh, your relationship with your parents. It goes back to any trauma that you underwent as a child, uh, and your reaction to those traumas and how it caused you to act. And we all have that because it may not even be a trauma. It may be just life events that maybe didn't rise to the level of a trauma. But anyways, your question was, how do you discover that? So that's the the basis of it. Now, how you do that? Uh, Sometimes you can do it by talking to another person, like a professional, a psychologist, will probably help guide you through that process. Or, one great way I think to do it on your own is by journaling,
Mm,
you
mm-hmm,
know, by getting just writing every day. In fact, this last week I was talking with an incarcerated person that really believes in journaling, and
mm.
it's really helped him. Uh, and he
I
said
believe, yeah, that's a really good one. I've had a lot of clients have a lot of success with journaling, but it takes a lot of discipline.
it does.
Mhm.
Like to sit down every day and write for a set amount of time. It's not easy
Mhm.
because life gets in the way, even in prison, with
Right,
work and other persons, et cetera, et cetera.
right, right. I like that a lot. So,
Mhm.
you've got to be able to, like Joe's saying, start with self-reflection. You're going to have to take the time somehow to reflect on your thoughts, behaviors, and actions. And like he says, consider keeping a journal
Mhm.
about those reflections, especially when you've reacted in a negative way. Then sit down. That's a really good way to have the life lesson. um, Being able to make that honest self-assessment as well, so when you're reflecting, when you're finding those times when you're thinking, wow, I really reacted like a butthead that time or whatever, then ask yourself some of those hard questions about the behavior, about the triggers, about those motivations for why you reacted the way you did. And you have to be not only disciplined to do this, but you have to be brutally honest about your character defects. And the
Of
other thing
course.
that Joe mentioned was getting feedback from others. So asking, someone on the yard who might be on the path,
Mhm.
the rehabilitation path, family members that are, healthy, functional, non-toxic family members that can really have a meaningful discussion with you. Even an officer, if willing. There are some really, really cool officers that do offer to help, in not in a official way, but maybe just as a, unofficial way. And asking for be willing to ask for feedback about your behavior and your attitudes, because other people can be that mirror that you need to notice patterns that you are unaware of. Listen, and then when they give you that feedback, you have to listen without defensiveness. And the defensiveness is your ego. Your ego always wants to dominate, like we talked about last week. And so
Yeah.
you need to listen without defensiveness. And that is so difficult for every one of us, myself included. And but sometimes we just can't see what's going on, and you can get some really great ideas for how to identify character defects. Because I'll tell you, that question is asked at what, Joe? 9 out of 10 hearings,
Mm.
maybe 10 out of 10.
Sure. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's always going to be asked because that's what they're addressing, when they're determining either the denial length or whether to give a grant. They're always
Hmm.
looking at that and how you've addressed it. So before you address it, you have to identify it and admit it.
Yeah, yeah, and
Another
I think go for it.
another way that you can work on character defects, and I like what you said about talking to someone over there, even a correction officer, but you really have to trust that person, uh,
Hmm.
especially in that environment. But they know that better than I do. So um,
Right.
another way of discovering yourself and who you were in the past is called a thing called psychodrama, and that
Mm.
is like acting out with others, like in a theater type present
Mm.
event. Uh, like you play a role and other people play a role, and then you reenact a an event, and learn who you are by going back and role playing that, and then as the session moves on, you can uh, switch roles. Like you can like become the victim and see how you feel as the victim if you're doing the crime, reenacting the crime. And I've heard that that's good, even especially DD 1 or 2 3. They by doing this they learn a lot that they're not able to learn in other ways. They go, oh yeah, that's who I was at that time, that's what I did, that's how I was feeling, because they're role playing it, and reenacting it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's called psychodrama, and it was first discovered by, well, the guy's name was, I believe, J.L. Moreno, and he
Huh.
actually used that in the state of New York in the prison system back in the 1920s. So
Wow.
uh, it's if you've ever been in a psychodrama session, it's revealing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, that's a very that's like part of maybe a group thing if they could ever
Yes.
get it going. But
Exactly. It's
mhm,
I like the difference between that. You need a group setting with other people, and obviously, it should they should all know that it's confidential. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But
right.
also, that yeah, you need a group. That's why I really like journaling, because you can do it on your own. You can just go off into a corner wherever, the law
Mhm,
library, and write.
mhm.
But those are just some of the methods you can use for self discovery.
I like it. Also, you can read books, you can
Hmm.
attend groups, you can do
Oh yeah.
correspondence, you can get an in particular 12 steps. So 12 steps is all about identifying your character defects, identifying how those character defects lead to triggers, which lead to coping strategies, which ultimately is the addiction itself. And so
Hmm.
going to that
And you
12
can write
step
that stuff down in your relapse prevention plan. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
for sure. No, yeah, jump right in because
Mhm.
these thoughts are important. And as you know, when we get older, we have the thought and then it leaves us very quickly. So, um, you know, the books, the groups, the 12 steps, going back to this, harping on this all the time 12 steps, 12 steps, 12 steps. The commissioners love it. Most of their questions are relate to it. And most of the people that find success with their rehabilitation are seriously engaged in living a 12-step lifestyle. And we can also, through meditation, sometimes identify character defects and prayer, which is one
Mhm.
of another couple tenets of 12 steps as well. And then other people that you can rely on. You can cheat, you know, go and cheat, find a list of common defects. Like I
Mhm.
said, there's about 100 or something, several dozen anyway. And you can go, you know what? I'm kind of like that. I'm kind of resentful. I'm kind of unforgiving. I'm kind of angry. I'm kind of lazy, whatever it is.
Yeah. And you know what? Just don't call them cheats. They're prompts, uh,
Mm,
they're
nice.
prompting, because you say, hey, yeah, like you said, I think I was sort of like that. And then they can go back and they can, reflect on when they were like that and how that was like kind of integrated into their life, their lifestyle,
Mhm.
if you will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
That's that, that checklist. It's like seeing
mhm,
all of it and then picking and choosing who you were. If
mhm.
and then backing it up with examples and uh, things that you did and the way you acted.
Mhm. And, I'm always harping on this as well, meditation,
Hmm.
sit quietly without any input in your head other than the background noise. That's not going to affect your meditation practice. So I know that dorm living and thing, I can't do it. It's too loud. Well, the Buddhists would say that's when you should do it even longer. So I'm talking about the mental stimulus, the stuff that we want to inject into our brain necessarily. So music, television show, or whatever. And so then just sit quietly, even if you just can do no more. I always say, if you can just do no more than pay attention to moving and make it your goal, I am not going to fidget. Okay. And if you can do that fairly well for 5 minutes, 10, 15, and then build up to like 20 minutes, then add to that and say, hey, okay, I'm going to go from working on not fidgeting. You can see me, I'm a fidgeter, so it's hard for me. But then you can start focusing on, okay, you can focus on hearing noises Okay, so a bird, you notice a bird through the ruckus, you hear a bird chirping on the wall, you hear a whatever, somebody making something in the pod next to you, they're cooking up a soup or something, and you can just notice that as a non attachment type of thing. You're just saying is that. You could do that, or you could focus on your breath. You could counting down from 100, counting down from 10. I mean, I can't barely count down from 100. I can maybe get to 80, and I've gone off on a total tangent. Then you have to
Yeah.
start again. So then
Hmm.
you can measure your progress too, how you're doing, and it's not necessarily like I'm meditating great, because there is no score on it. It's just you either are meditating or you're not. Okay, so meditating is trying to notice that your mind has control over you. And in the Course in Miracles, it calls it the ego. The ego controls us 99% of the day. And the goal of the Course in Miracles, which I just learned actually is a nice companion to the 12-step program, but it's quite complicated for, the majority of us and me. So it might be too much all at once, but it really does help you to identify when your ego is in play and when you're either acting from a place of love, is what they call it, and some will define it as charity or whatever, but the Course in Miracles basically says that they liken it to not living in fear, and it's the ego that puts us in fear of something. Either I wonder what he's thinking about me. I think that person is out to get me. I'm going to lose all my money. I'm not good at this thing that I'm doing. He hurt my feelings, whatever, and react, attack, get defensive, lash out in violence. All that's ego, according to the Course in Miracles, versus love, which is not fear, not ego. And that is a good place to go as well when you're thinking about all this stuff. Not sure why I got off on that tangent, but asking yourself questions. So once you set aside that quiet time, okay,
Hmm.
then you start your reflection on your most recent interactions, your conflicts, your challenges. Note any patterns in your behavior that may have contributed to these situations, and then try and attach some kind of a character defect describer to that. And then ask yourself questions if you can't come up with stuff. What situations make me feel angry, anxious, upset, react, get defensive, allow the ego to come on board and do its dance on my mind, right?
Hmm.
And how do I typically react? How do I repeatedly, what are some of the repeat stuff that I constantly do? Where are my triggers? And then if you do have a trigger, identify it. Where does that come from? Is that an old childhood wound? Is that something new that you're just going? Is that a new coping strategy? Is that an old coping strategy? And like Joe said, then just keep writing them down. Even if you are meditating and you're supposed to be concentrating and not moving, if you have a key breakthrough, and the Course in Miracles talks about it as the Holy Spirit, and I think that our Holy Spirit is who we really are speaking to us, not the ego. It's the other side of that. And if you have that key moment, you've got this breakthrough, you should stop, I think, and maybe write it down in case you forget.
Wow, that's great, uh, Elizabeth. That reminds me of the concept. Actually, it's a question. Are we humans having a spiritual experience, or are we spirits having a human experience? You know,
Spiritual beings like trapped in these bodies.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know why you made me think of that. You triggered that thought in me, by the way. So,
Good, good, good.
um,
Yeah. And this is critical. The reason that Joe separated this from his book, I think I'm speaking kind of for him, which I tend to do, but he doesn't care because he's not like that. He doesn't care. I know that about him. He's
Well, that's part of my ego that doesn't care.
no, that's actually part of being a loving, open person is you don't need to, you're not threatened by it. It's not creating a fear response in you that I might be saying something. I think it's positive, but
Yeah.
the fact that I'm talking so much might not be. But the key here is, and I think why Joe separated this, because it is part of the 12 steps, which is the next chapter that we're going to go into next week. And that is, it's so important. It's so important to talking about remorse and your accountability and all of the questions that you have to answer and making amends for it and being rehabilitated from having a relapse prevention plan for those character defects. It's just so critical. So I think it's so valuable that Joe plucked that out as a separate chapter from the 12 steps.
All right.
So
Great.
next week, we were going to go into, I think his strategy 8 is working the 12 steps. And we've touched upon that today. And then we'll try and go into more depth next time. But all of these topics are so critical. And this book, again, is such a great resource for any of your loved ones in prison trying to find their way home.
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Anything anything else? Anything you wanted to talk about from this book or anything else?
I think we covered it succinctly, and I don't think there is. However, I just want to talk to you about some quick things off the record.
Okay, sure. Excellent.
As,
Yeah,
as they always like to say in the hearing. Let's
off the
speak off
record.
the record,
Off
Mr.
the
Haytas.
record. Perfect. So please, if you do tune into this show, I know there are maybe a dozen loved ones that listen throughout the week. Like and subscribe. If you have comments, we would love to review them, answer any questions if it's relevant to the day, or even if it's not, we will get to them. You know how to contact Joe if you listen to the other episodes. His contact information is in his book. And you know where to contact me. You could contact me in the comments. You could contact Joe in the comments, and I would
Absolutely.
forward them to him. So with that, I guess we'll wrap it up as a nice short overview of character defects and how to do that. Working it really is the lengthy process. How do you get started? Just try a few things that work for you. Journal, meditate, reflect, talk to people, join groups, get yourself into AA, however you have to get yourself into AA, NA meetings, CGA meetings, do it.
You said something there very important. Whatever you feel comfortable with, because this is about getting out of your comfort zone, but finding that group, finding that method, that's what you got to feel comfortable with.
Yeah, it's got to resonate. Otherwise, it might not work. But sometimes you have to overcome a character defect of being resistant to something that might be difficult.
Absolutely.
So make sure that that's not the reason. And for all our viewers, work the steps, read the Course in Miracle, work the lessons, do something, grow yourself, become rehabilitated people yourself, because there's a lot of walking wounded around here.
Yeah.
A lot of bad parents. A lot.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming the parents. Not blaming the parents. I'm just saying.
I know.
The majority of us come from dysfunctional homes.
Yes. In
So
one way or another. Yes.
one way or another. And okay, with that, I will sign off. Keep it short and sweet, Joe, and I'll talk to you on the other side of the stream.
Okay,
Thanks
very good.
for all the viewers and the support that we do get.
Thank you.